I'd like to introduce my dear friend, James Vasquenza, who is a survivor from the North Tower, and he will be here to introduce Dr. Stephen Jones. Thank you.
Good evening. Okay. Good evening. My name is James Vasquenza, Jr. I'm a survivor of the events that occurred on September 11th, 2001, as I was at work that day in the North Tower when the building was hit by American Airlines Flight 11. For years, I have avoided any information regarding the events that occurred that day. I assure you, not an easy task with all of the different mediums that have and continue to cover this historical event. 6 years later, I've begun to look at certain details of the events that occurred that day. To say the least, many of us are unimpressed with the official report of these events, and to that extent, we have many questions regarding the findings. All anyone seeks when tragedy strikes is an understanding of how such an event could have occurred. In essence, we seek the truth. The truth can be delivered in many ways, and the most compelling evidence is always conveyed through the sciences. Tonight, I am honored to present to you a man whose scientific intellect provides compelling detail regarding the collapsing of several World Trade Center buildings. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Stephen Jones.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate all the people I've met. It's overwhelming emotionally in many ways to meet with James and Patty and Bob and then the workers here, John and everybody. And I can't name everybody, so I'm sorry about that. Damon and the list goes on. It's been quite an experience, and let's get started here. So I guess I will use this microphone, Howard. It seems to be all right. So here you've seen earlier with Richard the collapse of World Trade Center 7. I have to show that. It's obligatory that everybody has to pass through that. And for myself, this is what interested me in 9/11 research about, well, it was spring of 2005. I remember quite well. There was a lady speaking at a gathering that I went to with my wife, and she said, if you think, she was talking about something entirely different. She paused and she said, if you think that the Twin Towers came down just because they were hit by airplanes, you have some major surprises ahead of you. And half the audience started applauding. And I was thinking, what in the world is she talking about? I just was almost, well, I was clueless at the time. I've been called clueless since, but I think I have a few more clues now that I can show you. And anyway, just right away, I was on my computer. Fortunately, I got to WTC7.net and saw the collapse of Building 7. And right soon after that, I was with my stopwatch, which I have on my watch, and looking at the time for the roof as it starts its steady decline, the corner there of the roof, watching it go down, timing it, comparing that to free fall. I mean, now I'm hooked, because physics doesn't allow a roof to fall as if there's nothing in the way. There's a lot of concrete and steel in the way, and that's going to slow it down. It's just conservation momentum, basic physics. Okay, but tonight Richard has done a great job covering the waterfront quite well. I'll try not to repeat too much, so that means I get to talk about the new stuff. And I have to assume that you are familiar with what Richard said. And so we can sort of go from there. His was maybe 101. This is 501. If I can put it that way. His is more 201 or 3, I guess. Okay. I do want to start with a thought. I moved this slide up, and that is, I want you to know we are the good guys, trying to get the truth out, trying for peace, trying to get justice. Those are good goals. And I want you to remember that, even though you're called nutty. What have I been called? I can't repeat some of the things in this company, but freak, yeah, fringe, conspiracy theorist all the time. Nutty conspiracy theorist, the different adjectives that go along with that. It's like a knee-jerk, like you're conditioned, Conspiracy theorist, the wall goes up. Radical, yeah, in my case, radical right-wing. I mean, but to me, those lose meaning now. How about truth? Telling the truth is radical in an environment like we have. Now, I'm sure we have lots of names we could recall that we've had used on us. About 10 years ago, I invented this solar cooker, and I've talked about it specifically for people in developing countries. Uses the sun to cook food directly rather than going through electricity. It's very simple design, and the idea is keep it simple and cheap so that it's usable just about anywhere you have a reflector. And for example, this one is made out of cardboard and aluminum foil. That was my first one, and it works very well, actually. Boils water. I have data, and I've published those data. If you go to solarcooking.org, you'll see the data. Several papers there. Oh, I am on your right here in the photo. And my friend there is from Mali. And I found out where Timbuktu is. I thought Timbuktu was just some remote, maybe non-existent place, but it actually is in Mali. And I gave him some of our aluminized mylar cookers to take to Mali to demonstrate and help people get going on solar cooking. Many places in the world, they have run out of fuel wood and are burning dung, whatever they can come up with. It's becoming a big problem in Haiti, for example, where we sent over 200 of the cookers. Students and I put these together to send to the folks in Haiti. A bunch have gone to Mozambique most recently, and I have I've only got about 150 foils left. I bought these aluminized mylar. Actually, I bought it in a roll. My son's helped me cut it, We just have had a wonderful time with this for about 10 years, and now I'm going to send whatever I have left I want to send it to Iraqi refugees. There are over 2 million Iraqis who've left their country because of the invasion of Iraq and the conditions there. And then there's about 1.9 million, this is from a BBC report, internally who've left their homes and displaced within Iraq. So yeah, about 4 million people have been driven from their homes because of this war. Now, as I've talked to a number of 9/11 truthers, if we can call ourselves that, and justice seekers, then I find that we need to help each other. This is difficult. When I first realized that what was going on here, you see, and Ellen Mariani, when I heard her testimony, she's talking to George Bush and saying, I want some answers. My husband, he died in one of the planes, and he was in the Air Force. But anyway, some of you know Ellen's story. She tried a lawsuit. It did not work out for her. Lost her home in, I guess, New York and so on. Others, I know, I took early retirement at age 57. I'll talk about that just a little bit because they wanted me to retire. But anyway, the point is we work together. We're doing fine, by the way. No, I'm not yes. And so I want to emphasize that. I want to point out, I also brought this slide up, that the truth movement that we're involved with is international. And I'm just so pleased to see Sophia and Richard out there and others. Steve, I think, is out there helping with DVDs and literature. I like to point people to this. You'll hear me mention it. Journal of 9/11studies.com. 90 papers now, peer-reviewed papers in this journal. So we've filtered through. That's the way science works. You know, you have kind of a filter and you have various hypotheses, and some of them make it through because the data lets them through. As they confront the data, they make it through, some don't. And, and some don't at first, and then later they do. So keep that in mind. But that's the purpose of the journal, is to provide some filtering and to get the best ideas that we can. And we have now 90 papers. I realize that's getting quite a lot, but if you really want to climb the learning curve quickly, I would spend some time. Recommend that to you, as well as these other sites. The latest news, I usually turn to 9/11 Blogger, see what's going on. There are some other good places, 9/11 Truth and AE 9/11 with Richard Gage and so on, STJ. Media, building local groups, that is so important. You know, as I travel around, the strength is, we're all in this together, right? And the strength is in supporting each other, building these local support and education groups. Certainly it takes courage to speak out, and I want to emphasize the importance of civility. I've noticed that here. It's great, and good Yankee ingenuity combined with civility. It's just what we need. Okay, here we go. Just to remind you that the let's see, the Building 1, the North Tower, was hit at 8:46 a.m. and 9:03, the South Tower. The Pentagon then was hit at approximately, there's some debate about the exact time, 9:38. The point is that's 52 minutes, and I want to start there. 52 minutes after the Building 1 was hit, that the Pentagon was hit. That's a lot of time without air defenses intercepting that aircraft. As Patty mentioned, you just don't fly up and shoot it down. You go up and try to work with the plane, and it had happened, was it 67 times or something like that in the year before 9/11, that military jets had been scrambled to escort planes that had gone off course and to help them. So this is a big puzzle, and I know the Jersey girls talked about this one. It's a big question. Why was our multi-trillion-dollar system not in effect that day? There are papers in the journal about this topic that go into some detail. I want to quote Secretary of Transportation Norman Mineta. He has since stepped down, but he was at the time Secretary of Transportation. To the 9/11 Commission, he testified. Now, his testimony didn't make it to the 9/11 Commission report, so you know it's important. And he testified that he went to the Emergency Operations Center, kind of a bunker under the White House, at about 9:20 a.m. that day. Vice President Cheney was there and in charge. And that's interesting. She is not responding. Oh, now it catches up. Okay. It was slow. Okay. I'm going to quote now from Secretary Mineta. During the time that the airplane was coming into the Pentagon, and despite what the History Channel tried to say that this was maybe a different plane, it was, he has made it clear since then. He was talking about the plane that was heading towards the Pentagon. There was a young man who would come in and say to the Vice President, "The plane is 50 miles out. The plane is 30 miles out. And when it got, and by the way, 50 miles out is plenty of time to scramble a jet. There are two Air Force bases, Otis and Andrews, near Washington, D.C. And just minutes, a couple minutes, you can be up. And it's probably the best defended airspace in the world around Washington, D.C. But, 50 miles out, you're talking 10, 12 minutes, something like that. Plenty of time. When it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the vice president, "Do the orders still stand?" Now, this is a remarkable young man, if you think about it, standing up to Cheney and saying, "Look, do these orders stand?" He's worried about it. He has a conscience. I like this young man. He needs to testify and have an opportunity to explain what he... All right. Yeah. The vice president turned and whipped his neck around and said, "Of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?" And then, within a couple of minutes, the Pentagon was hit and lives were snuffed out. Now, why did this happen, and why isn't there more insistence that we find out then? What are these orders? Obviously, it wasn't orders to intercept the plane. They could have done that 50 miles out, easily, 30 miles out, plenty of time. 10 miles out, you're starting to get, it's starting to be more difficult, but I'll show you in a minute. They were well aware, obviously, that this aircraft was coming in, and they didn't do anything about it. I'm actually going to go to April first. April spoke out. She was in the Pentagon, on the same floor, and was knocked out. So she was very near to where this aircraft went in. By the way, I'm not going to say what kind of aircraft. I don't want to get into that right now because we need videotapes to really find out. But the point is, there was something that hit the Pentagon and something coming in. Her baby was with her that day. She gave her story in Irvine this past, it was March, I think. Yeah. And she said there was no warning or not even an alert. Now they knew 50, 30, 10 miles out that something's coming. No warning to her. She would like to know why. She is speaking out. As you know, the FBI seized, most of you know this, seized videotapes, surveillance tapes that would show what hit the Pentagon from nearby hotels and businesses just minutes after the hit. So again, we would like to see a release of these data. If there's nothing to hide, why hide it, right? Let's get these. Now let me go back. So this is from a paper by Mark Gaffney in the Journal of 9/11 Studies. I just chose two photographs. One that shows the E-4B. This is a very sophisticated plane. It's a 747 loaded with electronics gear. The Air Force has about 4 of these. And there are several photos. Again, I just picked this one. This is from Telemundo that showed this in the area, the vicinity of the White House and the Pentagon on that day. I believe this is fairly new information. And believe me, he's done quite a thorough job, and he will continue to work on this. It's his passion right now. I just am curious, how many of you have heard about this plane? Okay, so quite a few, but maybe a third or a fourth. So there you can read more about this. The presence of this plane has been denied by the military. I guess they don't want to admit that they knew that there was something coming and they had this sophisticated jet up there. See, there's some questions, right? What was that jet doing there? And why didn't Cheney do something? I brought this one up too. I happen to be partial to the U.S. Constitution, and yesterday my wife and I, thank you. I'm glad you are too. But we've lost a lot. Patty was mentioning that earlier, that we've lost an awful lot since 9/11, and you know that. I mean, the aggressive wars. The Constitution talks about defense repeatedly in the document. It doesn't talk, it never justifies aggressive war, not at all, quite the contrary. And my wife and I went to Noah Webster's house here in the area, and it's in West Hartford, I believe, and yeah, it's not far. And we were reminded of his efforts to get the Constitution, and on your license plate it says the Constitution state. Yeah, so that's great. Okay, it's a great place to be. Torture, you know, and the Constitution says no unusual punishments, and here recently, well, it's not all that recent, that unfortunately, well, apparently at the highest levels, torture has been approved. You know the story. But recently, that was passed, basically putting the Geneva Conventions and the Constitution off to the side. Warrantless wiretapping. What bothers my dad, who has been a Republican for as long as I can remember, he's in his 80s now, is this national debt. It's gone up by about $3 trillion or so since Bush Cheney took office. Cheney said deficits don't matter. Well, guess what? They do matter. It's coming home to roost. The dollar is sinking. You may have noticed. The three branches of government with checks and balances, we are losing that. Kucinich, I'm glad to see, is pushing for impeachment of Cheney. It's a constitutional right. There you go, Kucinich. She's got a sign there. You know, and later, just to be fair, I'll talk about Ron Paul. So, okay, okay. Richard showed this. Reminds you that Building 7 was very solidly built, and the FEMA report talks about damage on the circled. A little hard to see, but it's the let's see, that would be the south face of Building 7. You can read about it. My paper is in the journal September of 2006. We moved it over to the journal because I had to get it off my university website. You must get it off today. So I did, and put it in the journal within about a day or two. As it had already been, I mean, I could see this coming a little bit, so that particular thing, not everything. Anyway. About Building 7, the NIST report on the towers came out in October of 2005. And then I had this paper coming out in November, so I was busily reading through a lot of that NIST report, and along with others like Jim Hoffman and others that who else? Eric Douglas, I think. Anyway, we were kibitzing about this report and its flaws, which are many. Now, the report on Building 7 is long overdue, and they keep promising, well, it'll be, like they said it'd be last spring. And then in June, they said, well, in fact, this is the quote, June 29th, NIST expects, not much of a promise, to release its draft report on World Trade Center 7 by the end of the year. Well, the clock is ticking, and you know, they've got a little time left. I would like to see them release at the same time the photos and videos that they obtained at taxpayer expense from private citizens, you know, who dutifully filmed and videoed events of that day, so that is open to us to look at. Yeah. Okay, from the Loose Change movie, the final cut, which is coming up, I hope that it will be released and all of you will support that, going to it. I hope it'll be released in theaters. Do you know, John, if they're actually going? Not sure. Okay, anyway, they interviewed a November 27th, where? Keene, New Hampshire. King, thank you. King in New Hampshire. Keene, thank you. Okay, thank you. New Hampshire, that's great. It might even affect the election. Wouldn't that be something? Okay. Quoting a security guard who had been in Building 7 on 9/11 before either tower collapsed. He was asked to go in there and escort someone up to the area where Giuliani had an office, interestingly, in Building 7. We subsequently went to the stairwell and were going down the stairs when we reached the 6th floor. Now remember, this is before either tower had been hit. The landing that we were standing on gave way. There was an explosion, and the landing gave way. I was left there hanging. I had to climb back up and now had to walk back up to the 8th floor. At the 8th floor, they were able, with the help of firemen, to find a way out. Now, this is before either of the towers had been hit, an explosion serious enough in Building 7 that they couldn't continue down the stairwell. Isn't that something? So this is new, I think, to most of you. Which? Oh, I'm sorry. Before it collapsed. You're right. I'm sorry. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I have it right here in writing. Before they collapsed. Thank you. Now, NIST has, in their report, it said, NIST has found no evidence of a blast or controlled demolition event, you see. We'll talk, in fact, I'll mention it now. I've done quite a bit of work showing evidence in the dust for thermite, which Richard mentioned. Now, NIST then was asked about thermite. Have you looked for this thermite? It's part of the NFPA 921 code. Whenever there's a fire and what appears to be a crime scene, they're supposed to look for thermite. It's spelled out specifically. So they were asked, did you look for thermite? And they said, no. We didn't look for this, despite the code that requires it. And then they have the audacity, with all the eyewitnesses seeing flashes, hearing these explosion sounds, and this fellow in particular. I mean, there's a lot of eyewitnesses that came out early on. NIST has found no evidence of a blast or controlled demolition event. And did you look for residue of thermite? No, we didn't look. Yeah, so we didn't see anything. Okay. I feel, I want to quote also from NIST's effort to contract, which they did with a company called ARA in New Mexico, to analyze the collapse of WTC-7. So if you're having difficulty, what do? You outsource the study, and they did that with ARA. But here's what reads. This is on their site, solicitations, and they asked for Building 7. Now remember, this fellow said he was on the 6th floor, right? When the explosion, he couldn't get down. He had to go up to the 8th floor, and there he was able to get out. Create detailed floor analyses to determine likely modes of failure for floors 8 to 46. Don't look at anything below 8, please. And it has 47 stories, too. So as a scientist, that makes me say, wait a minute. The most interesting thing is below floor 8 and above floor 46. I mean, obviously, that's what I want to know about. And why do they take this unscientific approach of saying, now, when you study the collapse of this building, we don't want you to look below floor 8. It's just remarkable to me. And then they go on, due to failure of one or more supporting columns, you see, in the building. And so, now, I can help them out here. We already know who did it, don't we? So we have the red arrow theory here. And you see, there it is. There it is. I mean, it's very easy. And people say, well, we know and bin Laden did it, but yeah, okay, that makes sense to me. You know, the big red arrow. Okay, moving right along. Okay, so the difference then between the political method, the unscientific method, and the scientific method is, in science, we try to start then with all the facts, and we keep gathering facts. And we do have hypotheses, and these facts act like a filter. And the good hypotheses get through because they coincide with the facts. And the hypotheses that are not so good, like fire only, you know, for Building 7, and some damage, they just don't get through because they don't coincide with all the facts. Now, if you put blinders on and say, I'm only going to look at floors 8 to 46, maybe, I don't know, you could get some idea that fits your preconceived conclusion, which is, I put this here, Muslims did it. That seems to be the preconceived conclusion. Here's the conclusion. What facts can we find to support it? See, that's the political method. And it's really too bad. I have that NIST is, I believe, constrained, and I have good evidence for that, by political considerations. And that is an associate of mine. Worked at NIST. Actually, I know a couple of them, but this one in particular worked there for years, and he said that a few years ago, with the Bush-Cheney administration, then there was a shift at NIST. The director was no longer a scientist, as had been the case in the past. Instead, it was a political appointee that was politically oriented, and their reports had to be, now it's a different kind of filter, had to be filtered, but now it's a political filter. Will this meet the goals of the, I don't know, I guess I'll have to say the administration, or not? Now, in the Journal of 9/11 Studies, we have a good group of people, and I've pictured some of them here. Graham McQueen actually is here today. You know who this is? David Ray Griffin, good friend of mine. This is someone you would like to know, some of you guys, I suppose. Laurie Manuel. This is Kevin Ryan. This is David Griscom, professor and a fellow of the American Physical Society. Has written a paper in the letters section of the journal. And then this is a student, University of British Columbia, I'm pretty sure I remembered that correctly, who's recently written a paper and went through the peer review process, and he had to work pretty hard to get it polished, but he did a good job. His paper is about the industrial military financial complex. Remember Eisenhower's warning and how this has now grown, and this Project for New American Century adopted a lot of these, you follow me, of these ideas, and yeah. So, but if you're not following me, you just go to the journal, there's the URL, and read his paper. It's great. And I think you'll enjoy it. He's a good young man. You know, it's difficult. When I first learned about 9/11, I spent some sleepless nights, and then I feel better now because there's a lot of people looking at this. It makes it easier if we're working together. The point of no stacked up floors is obvious when you look at the ground zero from above. The core columns are missing. These core columns, yeah, this is a picture that also I gave to Richard, but you see these core columns. I didn't take the picture, obviously. They're enormous in these towers. And the floor pans going around, then FEMA came up with this idea that those floor pans pancaked. But then, how do you explain the core? What happened to the core? It's interconnected. It's very sturdy, you know, these huge steel columns. I guess I'll use this expression. A friend of mine said, you know, it's like the FEMA explanation would be the floor pans drop. So you drop your pants, and all of a sudden your legs disintegrate. You know, that's you know, I mean that just doesn't happen. You see what I mean? So you see, I mean, what happened to the core? Where are the core columns? They're just gone. And besides that, there's no pancaking. So NIST caught on quickly. The pancaking notion, which is promoted also by a NOVA presentation, some of you may have seen that. This pancaking idea was just rejected by NIST. They said, no, that's not it. And Richard explained also this question, but so I'll move on now to the latest this year. Bazant and all wrote a paper. It has been published. Journal of Engineering Mechanics, as I recall. And this is the picture now. So without the pancake theory, that one is, it didn't pass the filter. Even they admit that doesn't pass the filter of facts. So what do? They have essentially an intact block here that pushes down. You see the crush down phase, pushes the rest of the building down, crushes it, boom, 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 just amazing. And then when it gets to the ground level, close to it, you have the crush up phase, and that block then disintegrates, and you end up with this picture. You see, it's gone. No more tamper, this big tamper. Now, I looked at that and I thought, now let's see. If I drop this block of floor, so the plane goes in here, we're just going to go with NIST. There's a lot of questions on this, but we're going to say, okay, all these core columns, 46 or 47 core columns plus 240 perimeter columns, fail more or less simultaneously, so the thing just starts to drop. We're just going to remove it and let her drop. And this case, and now you've got, oh gosh, a couple 100,000 tons of steel and concrete in the way. In this case, the real life case, the tower is there. And in this case, we're just going to drop it in air. And the question is, which block will fall faster to the ground? This is not a trick question, you know. I've taught enough years of physics that I know students think, well, is this a trick question? I mean, I think I know the answer. This one's going to fall much faster. In fact, this one might not even reach the ground. There's so much stuff in the way. And that is the point of the papers by Gordon Ross in the journal and Kenneth Cutler, professor of math, and who actually calculates the time, see, with some simplifying assumptions, because there's a lot going on here, but the time for this block to reach the ground. And if the safety factor, these buildings are built with safety factor. 1 would mean it's just hanging there. If you do something, it's going to just give up. But they don't build it with a safety factor of 1. They put some extra strength in there. And these buildings are said to have a safety factor of about 5. At 2.9, according to Ken, the collapse will not continue. Gordon Ross gets the same conclusion. In other words, what makes you think that just because it gets started, that this block is going to continue all the way to the ground and leave you with no core columns? Just everything's just smashed. What makes you think that? So you should think like a scientist and say, wait, conservation of momentum, conservation of energy, and those are the 2 principles Ken Cutler uses primarily, and deduces. And then you have, and deduces that the progression should have stopped. You know, you could get it started, we'll grant that, but why it should stop. And if the safety factor is less and less, then it'll go faster and faster, but it will not go at free fall speed. Whereas if you measure the roof time, it's difficult for the towers because there's so much dust. But it is approximately 12 seconds, plus or minus 2, and that's close to free fall time. It's a little greater than free fall time. But then again, if you go to controlled demolition, where you know they put explosives in, everything's legal, and no people inside, right? And they drop the building with controlled demolition, and you time the roof to fall. And I've done this a few times, where you can see it clearly, and it's just a little slower than free fall, but close to free fall speed. See, just like you have for the towers, and certainly very much like Building 7, which fell in 6.5 plus or minus 0.2 seconds. I measured that several times with students, so we had a good number and an error bar, whereas free fall is 6.0 seconds for an object dropped off the roof of World Trade Center 7. Do you see what I'm saying? 6.0 if you just drop something for the roof. And then if you follow the roof, it was 6.5 on 9/11. Just about free fall speed, just what you see with controlled demolition. So here are the papers that talk about this. And yeah, well, in the journal, so you can go there. I hope you will. Now, so back to the Besant paper, There's a problem right away with this upper block as a tamper, besides the time it takes to fall. And that is Newton's third law, which tells you the force is not just down, there's also an equal and opposite force up. That is Newton's third law. And I've taught enough engineers in my 21 years teaching, actually a little more than that because I taught at the University of Idaho system as well, that I've found that it's a tough concept. You mean the forces are really equal? Yes, they are. Accelerating, still equal? Yes. And so what it means is that there's an equal force up as down. So what that then leads us to say is, well, now let's see, if it's damaging the rest of the building on its way down, it's probably going to damage that block also. And even more damage to the block because the upper columns are, I said, weaker, hotter, the fires, hot air rises, and so that would tend to weaken them, possibly. But in addition, the core columns were tapered. So where they're 4 foot by 2 foot at the bottom, is the number I recall, they taper as you go up, see? So equal forces, but not as strong above as below. So that's what you expect. Let's actually see what happens. Look and see now we're sending this theory of Besant's through the filter of data. Look at that block. Is it intact? Look at here, it's not even crumpling yet. Okay, now we can start seeing some action there. And as Richard pointed out, the antenna moves first and indicating something happened to the core in there. You can look at this over and over. The upper block, it just does not appear to remain intact. So the whole theory is inconsistent with data. It dies. This is the theory that NIST is relying on from my reading is the Besant theory. Because NIST only goes to the point where the tower is poised to collapse. Their term, poised to collapse. It's in their report. So Besant says, okay, now we can explain how the collapse occurred. The complete and rapid collapse, no. You can't explain with this notion of an intact block of floors as a tamper. We have to consider Newton's third law, conservation of momentum, conservation of energy. It dies. Now, a friend of mine and I are actually have written a response paper to Besant, and we've submitted it to a major journal, and we'll see. It actually has been provisionally accepted. In other words, it passed the first round of peer review. So I'm pleased to announce that because it's been a long time trying. Well, I've been at this for about, 2.5 years, and we're just really hopeful then that we can get that. Let me just point that out into a major journal. This is my first major paper. I'm the first author. Oh, yep, there. On this paper in Physical Review Letters, paper on muon catalyzed fusion. The reason I bring this in is not to brag, although I am pleased by this paper. It has stood the test of time. This was in 1983. I began studying muon catalyzed fusion in 79. It's just about 1979. So 4 years to get into a major journal. It's been 2.5 years on 9/11, and we're getting now, I hope, into a major journal. We've passed the first hoop, the first peer review. Let's see, Richard talked about that. Let's skip this. Again, these squibs that you see the squib? The Besant says, well, this is this intact, it's like a piston, and it forces air out. That's their explanation. Well, that's only supposed to be towards the last, first of all, in their paper, whereas you see here this jet blasting out way below the destruction zone. And second of all, we've already seen that this upper block did not remain as a piston. Sorry, guys. You hit the facts, you die. I mean, your theory dies. I don't mean you do. No, your theory. Okay. That's the way it is in science, by the way. And we have to understand and accept that when our pet ideas don't square with observation, we then have to let them go and let the chips fall where they may. Okay. On April 11th of this year, Bob McIlvaine, Bill Doyle, family members of 9/11 victims, and myself, Kevin Ryan, Richard Gage, group Scholars for 9/11 Truth and Justice, we filed a petition with NIST demanding that it correct its erroneous methods and findings. This is a procedure that is recognized to get these guys to wake up. Okay. On September 27th of this year, they responded. They were late, but they did respond. And here's what they stated. And just see how this makes you feel. This is their response. We say, look, you got errors in this. Okay, here's their response. Oh, boy. I wonder if this thing's too hot or something. I guess I need a drum roll. It won't work without a drum roll. Okay, here we go. NIST replied, "We are unable to provide a full explanation of the total collapse," referring to the towers. This is in a letter, a formal letter, in response to our request for correction, and they admit we are unable to provide a full explanation of the total collapse. See? New. And I'm saying, well, we're going to appeal, and they want us to say, oh, well, that's wonderful. We'll just go away now and be quiet. No, we want to. They spent like $20 million to get to this point. They're unable. Man alive. I'll mention there's some other hypotheses that we can look at with this same set of data. The upper block of floors does not remain intact, obviously. Could a tower hit by a beam? Oh, I didn't mean to say, I meant just a beam. We don't know what kind of beam from space do that. Could a mini nuke do this? And I think I'll just leave it at that. There are papers in the Journal of 9/11 Studies that address these questions in a civil manner and dismiss both, actually all three of these notions. The top one is the official, basically the official story, Besant, and the other two are valid hypotheses to consider, but they don't fit the data. And it's not just these data that I'm showing, not just this, there's more. So some of you know about that, I won't worry about that.
This straight-down collapse is the whole point of controlled implosion, which only a
David
few
Griffin.
companies in the world are qualified to pull off. Third, these buildings collapsed at
here.
virtually free-fall
See
speed, which means that
see
the
the
lower floors, with
smoke?
all their steel and concrete, were offering virtually no resistance.
Okay, I wonder if I can stop that, but did you see that? I'll go back to another picture of this same thing. I guess I will address this for a moment. This mushroom cloud, so-called, has been used to justify theories such as a mini nuclear bomb. I'm sorry. But that, again, that hypothesis, we looked at it, it doesn't survive. But this, see, it kind of looks like a mushroom cloud. This is the South Tower collapse, or being destroyed. And what we see is this plume. Where is that plume from? Well, it's from the North Tower. You see, as the South Tower collapses, it's the North Tower's plume that's coming over. So, you see? So it's just, as you look at it, the smoke's going like that, it's expanding a bit, and as you look at it over here, see, it looks like a mushroom cloud, but it's not really, see? So again, the data, as we get more data, we hit that barrier of data, and the hypothesis falls. The mini-nuke theory also falls because it just simply is not the radioactivity. But we have looked at these.
This straight down.
Not the radioactivity. But we have looked at these.
This straight down.
Okay.
This straight.
Yes, thank you, David. We'll move on now. Okay, if you time that particular building, you'll see it's about 4.9 seconds, and a little over 4.9, which is free fall time. So this is one that I looked at and measured. Just real quickly, the amount of charge for the landmark tower. According to reports, I'm quoting directly from this report, this article on this, 364 pounds of RDX, conventional type explosive, for this demolition purpose, to bring down this huge tower, 364 pounds. I mean, I almost weigh that much myself, you know. Well, not quite, but, you know, okay. 369 shaped charges required. Now, if you scale 380 feet to 1360 something for the World Trade Center towers, you find about 1,300 pounds of this similar explosives would be sufficient. And see, these numbers are about the same. So about 1,300 charges, which would not be that difficult to then carry in a team of, you probably outsource that too. Have you noticed these guys outsource things? So outsource that and let these guys go in, have access to the elevators, get close to the core columns, plant these charges over a period of months, I presume. I don't know. That requires, see, look, in a criminal investigation, you don't start out before you have a trial with all the answers in place, right? You say, look, we've got this evidence and this evidence and this. We have plenty to necessitate a criminal trial. Now we want to start asking people questions under oath, subpoena power. We want that young man who's speaking to Cheney, for example. It's a different issue than the towers, but what were these orders? And why were you so concerned that these orders would stand, you see? And then, well, you could think of people to question about these things. Now look, this is not a game. And sometimes I have to remind myself this because the science is quite exciting. When I was talking about the evidence for thermite with a colleague of mine, a physicist, he said, wow, the data are just coming together. It keeps agreeing with this idea that this thermite was used, a very high temperature chemical reaction was used and in bringing down these buildings. And he said, I'm kind of excited, but then he said, but what it means, it makes me sad for our country. And that I had to agree with him. So this is not a game. The complete and rapid collapses of the towers and Building 7 we've talked about. Lack of air defenses we've talked about a bit. The World Trade Center dust we'll turn to right away. It was toxic, as you know, even though people were told it was safe by the EPA press releases 5 days after the event. They were told to go back to the work, especially in the financial district. It was safe. It was not safe. It was toxic. A clear example of what we call in science data falsification. The everyday term for that would be lying, yes. It was not safe. Okay, hope you know that. The great deal of money made on the stock options. I won't talk about that tonight. I have talked about it before. Government officials withholding data. We've talked a little about that. NIST admits to having over 6,000 photos and 300 hours of video, which we, again, would like to see released. Okay, let's see, how are we doing for time? I figure I've got till, I didn't start till 6:30, so I got till 7:45, is that right? Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, half hour, wonderful. I'll have to move quickly. I want to tell you, when my paper first came out, and it is in the journal, entitled Why Indeed the WTC Buildings Completely Collapse. When this paper first appeared, and just within a few days it was on the internet, I received emails from a contractor. He also sent these emails to administrators at my university, and he said, quote, "The publication of this article can be stopped, and I have the contacts to make this happen. You need to give this very serious consideration. This is an issue that is more important than any individual career." I was pretty sure he was referring to my career. And by the way, I had received at this point 2 awards for teaching. I a full professor of physics. I taught for about 20 years. I believe I was well respected, and I enjoyed my position there. I soon lost it, but my position, but did I lose my temper too, maybe? I have learned, he said, after we had some correspondence on some technical issues, and I showed him that the NIST report was indeed very weak, and I talked about the molten metal in pools underneath the buildings. He had no answer, really, for that. I have learned, he said, to appreciate the value of silence, even in the case of superior data and information. And then this I perceived as a threat. As painful as it may seem now, this was in November of 2005, perhaps it may be less painful than could occur after publication. The paper was formally published in August of 2006. In September, early in September, I was put on administrative leave, and shortly thereafter offered early retirement, which my wife and I, after consideration, decided was probably the best course of action. Since then, I've been reading John Perkins' books, one of which is The Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and the other is The Secret History of the American Empire, approximately, title. Have any of you read those books? Good group. He immediately, oh man, he was right back. And this time he was talking about legal action against me and saying, you should not talk about thermite. And I pointed out to him, you know, I teach physical science. We have a thermite demonstration to these kids. You know, we don't think it's anything dangerous. His argument was that, well, maybe you're telling the terrorists something they don't know, and they, you know, this thermite. And I pointed out, you know, you can buy thermite on eBay. It's not like it's a big secret, you know, okay. And so I just wouldn't go along with him. He said, you know, maybe you would consider a grant. He said, I have contacts with Homeland Security and I could get you a big grant. And he even gave me 2 different ideas, one of which was putting redwood around the steel beams in existing buildings as a way to slow down the fire attacking the columns and so on. You know, it just didn't appeal to me. But he said, your chance of getting this grant would be greatly enhanced if you changed your research direction. I could perceive that as a bribe. And threat and bribe, I find, is what these economic hitmen use. Okay, enough of that. Let's go to another subject. Thank you. This is amateur video of this molten, this orange-colored, orange-yellow molten material. Now notice the ash there, the white ash drifting away. This actually made it to the NIST report, and they discussed this because it's before the collapse, so they pretty much could not ignore it. What is this orange flowing material? Oh, I think we've seen enough of that time-wise. So, NIST suggested in their initial report on the collapse of the towers that this was molten aluminum alloy from the planes that hit. This is the South Tower now that we were just seeing, this molten material, a lot of it. They said this would be aluminum. That was their best explanation, that melted somehow and flows out. Now, several problems with that. The orange color, first of all, implies a temperature. If you look at the correlation between the color has to do with the radiation from a metal and its temperature. There's a correlation there. It's in my first paper. This color would be about 950,000 centigrade. I'm going to use centigrade. I'm sorry, because that's what I use all the time. So, very hot, okay. Yellow hot. You've seen red hot. That's about 650 centigrade. Okay. Now we're calibrated. Anyway, they said, so first of all, how do you get the aluminum to stay around while you heat it up? You see, aluminum melts at around 600, and it varies quite a bit depending on the alloy, but roughly 600 centigrade. So how do you get it to stick around while you heat it up to 1,000 centigrade? In a big pot in there, you know, big pot, and then you dump it out. Well, it's tough, okay? But then beyond that, we actually did heat up. A friend of mine, Wes Lifforth, he has a paper in the journal on this subject too. It's in my first paper also. We heated up a steel pot to orange to yellow hot. And then we poured the aluminum out, with aluminum in, poured the aluminum out. So the steel was orange, glowing, solid though still, right? And the aluminum was silvery. We're students, we all saw it was silvery. But from the South Tower, this material clearly is not silvery, it is a orange to yellow color. Aha. When you pour out aluminum in daylight conditions, then it appears silvery. And that has to do with the free electrons in the aluminum, and its emissivity is very high for those of you who want to know about that. Lead does the same thing. Heat it up, pour it out. At these temperatures, it appears silvery. NIST responded, finally, to my question about this. It was in my paper. Okay, initially they said, NIST concluded the source of the molten metal was aluminum alloys from the aircraft, known to melt between 475 and 640 degrees Celsius, depending on the alloy, well below the expected temperatures, about 1,000 Celsius in the vicinity of the fire. So far, let's see what they say. Aluminum is not expected to ignite, no visual indication the material flowing was burning. And then here's where they admit now. This is in a report that came out 2006, so this is almost a year after their Towers report. Pure liquid aluminum would be expected to appear silvery. So they agreed with this. That was one point in our favor. That was good. So, but then they have an explanation. However, the molten metal was very likely mixed with large amounts of hot, partially burned, organic materials, furniture, carpet, partitions, computers, which can, I paused on that word, but anyway, which can display an orange glow, much like logs burning in a fireplace. Now, this can suggested to me that they hadn't actually tried to do this. So the next day, I'm out there doing the experiment. If I think it will. Thanks. Okay, here we go. So, how do we find out what it looks like, aluminum, when you put wood, plastic? It still doesn't answer the question how you get it up to these higher temperatures, but okay, we'll try it. We'll put wood and plastic in. Here's the first experiment. When you put it in, the stuff burns. Plastic, wood, paper, all that, it just burns in there. Here's my friend Wes, and he's going to pour it out. Watch the color. Oops. Oh, dang. It skipped. Watch now. It's going to do it again. Pour it out, and it's silvery. And you can see that with the eye, too. The aluminum, not surprisingly, is silvery. What happened is we looked at it, the organic material burned, but it also floated on the, tended to float on the liquid aluminum. So we did a second set of experiments. Now this is a young fellow that came to the university from NIST. He couldn't believe that they'd make a statement like that unless they had tried it, you know. So he said, I want to try it. And I said, okay, please, join the experiment. He wanted me to use ash. This is from my wood-burning stove, which has never melted, by the way. You know, my wood-burning stove never has. It's amazing. It's steel. Not worried about it. Anyway, took some ash and plastic, and later we'll put glass in there. Heat the whole brew up here. Just get it as hot as we can. And I want to show you this. This is this young man, physics. He's stirring with a long-handled screwdriver, stirring and stirring. We worked on that for about an hour, he was trying to get the ash to mix in, organics to mix in and glow, and it just wouldn't do it. Finally, we added glass, which is hard to melt, but it did give a little bit of, like a clump there, but it didn't mix in either with the aluminum. And I'm going to go to the last experiment. Finally, after over an hour, we decided, well, we'll just pour it out and see what happens. And watch the color, silvery. Now, the glass you can see in there is kind of a red, and it finally comes out as a clump. The molten stream still appears silvery. So, I invite NIST to show us how to do this trick, to make poured out aluminum acquire an orange glow like we see from the South Tower. Until they do that, I'm sorry, I cannot believe that this is aluminum, even though they say it can acquire an orange glow. What else could it be? It could be this highly exothermic reaction that produces molten iron as an end product, yellow, white hot. Temperatures up around 2,500 centigrade to start out with. Thermite, very typically. This is aluminum powder and iron or some other metal oxide. Aluminum oxide explains the white plume. And here you see a thermite experiment that I did, white plume. And there is white plume. You see it from time to time as this flows out of the building, this white ash drifting off. It fits like a glove. It's not a proof yet. If you add sulfur to this mix, it will cut through steel more quickly because it forms a eutectic. Okay, we've already seen this. No time to do it again. Let's see how this works. So we set off there's the thermate actually, has sulfur in it. It worked before. Come on, Wes, pick it up. It's pausing. I think my machine's getting hot or something. It really doesn't pause very often, but I have had it happen before. Oh, drum roll? No, I don't know. Aha. It is not happy. Oh, here it goes again. Same thing, but smaller. Let's see if it'll work this time. Watch as he pours it out. And it has a yellow.
Very nice.
Yellow.
Very nice.
And as it splashed, I actually
job.
looked at
Thank
it
you.
frame by frame. The splash was a reddish orange
That's it.
color. It was still liquid at the... Now, let's go back here. So, yeah. Oh, here, there's the still shot. You can see, as I caught it as he's pouring it out, this yellow color is still quite hot there. And then as it splashed, you can't see it here, but it splashed orange, red-orange. Now, here's the problem, folks. Aluminum at 1,000 C is silvery, poured out in daylight conditions. Steel at 1,000 centigrade is a solid. Now, we still haven't answered this question, have we? How do we get this material to be a liquid? If it's iron, iron solidifies at about 1538 centigrade. Orange is 1,000, pretty close, plus or minus. So how do we get this material to flow when it's, and appear orange at 1,000 centigrade, you see, around 1,000. The orange color tells you the temperature, plus or minus. Who knows the answer? It's adding sulfur. Good. And that's how we did it in this experiment, which I showed you. It worked. It was by adding sulfur, and here's the data. Forms a eutectic. You can have here's iron sulfide, iron oxide. 940 centigrade, you can still have a liquid. So there's the answer. It forms a eutectic. It's called. It lowers the melting point, and sulfur does. That's one of the reasons you don't have a lot of sulfur. Oh, in your steel. Okay, here's a thermite cutter. It was pretty fast. I'll show that again. It's for sale for demolition purposes, and we see it cutting through a steel rod in a fraction of a second. People used to say to me, well, what, you're going to put this thermite and let it melt through steel? You don't have to. You just buy this thing. It's available around, and it's the work of Robert Moore, who's here. Thank you, Robert, for finding this. It's great. This company sells these. I'm sure if we can buy one, watch closely as it punches through the steel. You see that spray? And I built one of these. And we put a piece of steel and zapped a hole in the steel. So it is very effective. It's not very hard. They had the patent. Robert found it, and I figured out, well, I can make one of those. And it works like a charm. Oh, that spray, when you get a spray, you get molten. Oh, man, I haven't even talked about the molten spheres. Forget the molten metal underneath. Sophia will talk about it. Read the journal. Okay, spheres. If you have thermite cutters, you expect then from this spray to have droplets of this molten metal in the air, and then those solidify, and you'd expect to have microspheres in the, I'll just call them spheres, in the dust, and they're rough sphere shapes. And here, sure enough, you see shiny spheres and glassy spheres in the World Trade Center dust in abundance, and other labs have seen this too, no question about it. The first one came from this apartment across the street about a week after 9/11. The second sample was collected by a scientist on the 14th, 4 blocks from the ground zero, and the dust had enough pressure to get around the window, underneath, on the indoor window sill. It's a wonderful sample. Tonight, yes, it was this evening, 2 in the audience told me that they have, one in particular, a sample collected the very day, during the daytime of 9/11. There's no chance of contamination from, see, I hear these debunkers saying, well, maybe it's cleanup, and during the cleanup procedure you get these spheres, right, cutting the steel. The spheres look different, and that's not something just to rule out. It's a good concept, but anyway, we have this sample from 3 days and long ways away, you see, to get away from that, and then we'll soon have the day of sample. These samples that we've looked at all show the same thing. And besides that, when you cut steel, it doesn't have a lot of aluminum. I'll show you the spheres that we find do iron, aluminum, and sometimes sulfur. I want to mention that Damon, who's running the conference with James, who introduced me tonight, provided this briefcase and contents and dust from the North Tower. The problem is that it was recovered in September of 2002, so a year later, and we're looking for samples that are very close to the time, however, to 9/11. However, it does show, it confirms other results, and you can see the little spheres. This is with an scanning electron microscope, SEM. Now, these are spheres from thermite. When you blast thermite, you also get these molten droplets. They solidify in the air. These are the spheres. They look very much the same. This one is from the World Trade Center dust. These two are from thermite. And we compare these. Here's the pattern from the World Trade Center that we observe with this particular sphere. Iron, a little bit of copper and manganese. S, sulfur. Significant amount of sulfur and aluminum. And of course, oxygen. Okay, now we compare with thermite. USGS and others also report the existence of these iron-rich spheres is already a problem. How do you get temperatures high enough to get these spheres, especially those that don't have sulfur, which we find in the fires, right? Okay, the R.J. Lee report also reports spherical iron particles. How do you get temperatures high enough? Notice in this one there's no sulfur. So it's not the sulfur that's giving you the melt. You see, you have to get up to very close to 1500. Fe2O3 actually has a higher melting point than that. It's around 16 something. So how do you get those temperatures with these fires, folks? You can get there easily with thermite. Again, here's an optical photograph of these little spheres formed from the spray. You get flow and spray. You get both. Okay, which one of these is World Trade Center dust? Which one is thermate? Oh, I left the answer right there. Okay, go back. But you can see the similarities. Iron, sulfur, aluminum, that's the signature for thermate. Thermate is with sulfur. Iron, sulfur, aluminum, we see in the World Trade Center dust. When I saw this, I said, this clinches it. I don't know of any other explanation. Cornell, I sent a sample of the dust to them. They found a sphere. I asked them to look at a bunch. It confirmed significant aluminum and iron. He's got some other things in here that are small, but I asked him anyway. After he saw this one sphere with iron, high iron, he didn't want to look anymore. But he did send me these data confirming results. This is now from the September 14th sample: iron, potassium, a little bit of sulfur, silicon, and aluminum. Again, the signature for thermite is iron and aluminum. The presence of silicon and potassium is interesting, particularly since when I look at the, one of these again is the thermite from John Peroulis, colleague of Richard Gage's. He ran thermite on his own, independent of me then, collected the spheres, sent them to me. And frankly, I can't remember which is, this is the thermite. It also has a little calcium in it. But look at the similarity. Iron, potassium, silicon, aluminum, magnesium, iron, potassium, sulfur, silicon, aluminum, magnesium. I mean, they're very similar. We asked the company that provided, see, I'm starting to say, now that looks really quite similar. Calcium, by the way, if it's around in your container, which he had a pot, garden pot or something, you can get some calcium. So I asked, he asked the company, what is your formula for this thermite? They wrote back and they said, we're not going to tell you, it's proprietary, what we put in there. And you can put different metal oxides, you see, it doesn't just have to be iron oxide. But then they added significantly that they did not add sulfur. And I was thinking, well, why would they comment about sulfur? We didn't ask about sulfur, It's curious. I would ask that company a few questions. How is this formed? The iron melts at 1538 centigrade. There's some more data at very high temperatures. NIST says in no instance did they report that steel melted due to fires. Melting point of steel is about 1500. The maximum, normal fires reach about 1100 Celsius. The maximum air temperature about 1000 Celsius in the World Trade Center buildings. There's a gap there. 1500 to melt iron. We see the spheres. We see the stuff flowing out of the building. The maximum temperature of the fire is 1100. How do you bridge that gap? The only way is some reaction, chemical reaction, that I can see, other than fires. It is proof. Just that alone, the temperature gap. Remember that term, temperature gap. And lead-coated, and Richard talked about this. Sulfur in the steel was observed. Official sample, World Trade Center steel at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. Again, consistent with the use of thermate with sulfur added. This is an independent laboratory now. World Trade Center steel, seeing sulfur in the steel. To me, folks, it's just like, this is obvious copper in there too. Did NIST test for explosives or thermite residues? Answer, NIST did not test for the residue of these compounds in the steel. Well, of course, they're not going to see anything. We have submitted some papers. I got just a few minutes, 1, 2. I probably won't have questions, but according to my watch. Thanks, David. Let me just bring up a few points. Sorry, I get so excited about the science, but we have to think about the implications too. So why is this, if you haven't heard about the North American Union, Google it. Oops, oh, sorry, wrong way. Let's see what Rockefeller says about this sort of thing. I'm going to go, yeah. Some believe, and this is in his book, Memoirs, David Rockefeller. Some believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and of conspiring, he used the word, with others around the globe to build a more integrated global political and economic structure, one world, if you will. If that's the charge, he's obviously going to deny it, right? If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it. David Rockefeller. New World Order, as mentioned, you remember, by President Bush Sr., but also by the current president. Brzezinski, so why this North American Union? Why letting the immigrants come in rather freely? Because it's a step on the way. We cannot leap into world government in one quick step, as Brzezinski explained. The precondition for eventual globalization is progressive regionalization. North American Union, African bloc, European Union, Asian bloc. And then these guys are very patient, and we can see what they're doing now. Robert Pastor, the planner for the NAU, said NAFTA was merely the first draft of a new constitution for North America. Our constitution is in peril. If this is a combination with these three countries, Canada, Mexico, US, the constitution is gone. They're planning a new constitution. Ron Paul, I wish I could quote him, I'm sorry. He talks about the stage is set, this is before Congress, May of this year, set for a country devolving into a military dictatorship. Few seem to care, time is short, but a course of action is clear. Resistance to illegal and unconstitutional usurpation of our rights is required. Let it not be said that we did nothing. Now this is a brave man, and he deserves our support. And I'll conclude with this thought. I actually will want to mention one thing, just in case we don't succeed with Kucinich's impeachment or Ron Paul's resistance to unconstitutional progress, then we really ought to have a food supply. In Utah, among the 9/11 truthers, this is very big, having a food supply. I recommend to you that you get right away a 3-month rotating food supply. I just have mine, and beyond that if you can, in case the economic depression becomes very severe and perhaps combined with another 9/11 event or a flu, a plague, then you might have to be quarantined or something where you would need a food supply in your home. I highly recommend that because I care for you people. And who will lead this investigation that we're seeking? We are actually doing it, if you realize what's happening here. We now have over 200 engineers and architects in AE 9/11 Truth. We have, I don't know, at least a dozen scientists working on this. You can look in the journal. We are reporting in the journal, and now we're submitting to mainstream journals. We do need the photos and videos held by NIST and FBI. Thank you.